The Innkeeper by Life Sketcher. Chapter 441 Upcoming Festivities. There was no flashy display and nothing special happened. Lex simply got a notification saying that the mystery trial would shut down as soon as the guest currently using it would exit, and the upgrade would take a short while. Lex shrugged and turned his attention to the next token, the 0.5-star increase token. This fella here would be his main attraction to a festival Lex was planning. He checked his MP and saw that he had a little over 20 billion of it, so he could begin his planning. He opened up the event panel and began creating the event. Basically, Lex was planning a big party and interesting events for a long duration of time. Although his intentions were to genuinely create this event and hoped that it would be successful, that was not his main goal. Lex had decided that until his own workers became strong enough to guard the inn, he would perpetually have events happening at the inn so he could hire external security. After all, he couldn't hire security without creating an event first. Moreover, it wasn't as if this event was destined to not be interesting. Lex's original intention was to host an event based around the fishing well, and have a long competition where guests tried to fish from various worlds, and even the Crystal Realm. Now he had even more options. The star rank upgrade would only be one of the events of the festival, though Lex intended to focus most of his marketing on the aid that event would give to cultivation. Moreover, there was one more thing happening at the inn he learned from his notification: many small realms were fusing with the inn's realm. The progress had reached 96%, so it would be completed soon. Lex looked into it and learned that the fusion would not expand the size of the original realm, but instead create a series of entrances dotted throughout the realm from which those other minor realms could be accessed. As for what was in them, that remained to be seen. Yet Lex planned to integrate those realms into his festival somehow. He also had a giant spaceship now. He could definitely find use for that. Furthermore, even if Lex ran out of all other activities and ideas, he'd make the festival about card games, whether it was stuff like poker or Pook Monster. Since his real purpose was the security the event provided, he could be as wild with his ideas as he wanted. He straight out spent 1 billion MP on the event, and made it 3 months long, starting 1 week later. Half the allocated budget was for security, while he would use the remaining half to plan the other festivities. He planned on using the star upgrade token in 2 weeks, so he'd get plenty of time to advertise for that as well. Logically, he should have waited even longer to use it to further capitalize on any guests he could attract using the boost in cultivation, but he himself did not want to wait too long before his breakthrough, and he wanted to use the opportunity provided by the star level increase to do so. The moment he started working on the event, ideas started flowing to him. He investigated the spaceship and its capabilities so that he could know what he could do with it. Unfortunately, while he had the ship, its power source had been converted into MP. If Lex wanted to use it, he would have to power it with MP. Furthermore, that was only a solution inside the inn. If he took it out, he would need a power source. In fact, while it looked like the ship was currently flying, it was in fact being kept in the air using the inn's powers. Lex would need to spend 1 million MP a month just to have the ship fly and have its basic functions operating. But other than mindlessly swallowing Lex's MP, the ship did many interesting things as well. It had remarkable medical facilities, though using them would be far from simple. Unlike the inn services, which could cater to any species, these needed to be operated manually and supplied with the appropriate supplies. Moreover, how successful a treatment would depend on the doctor's knowledge and skill of these equipment. In summary, they seemed to be able to cater to cultivators far stronger than the one the inn services could heal, but they required proper care instead of letting the system do the work blindly. Other than that, the ship had phenomenal life support functions, completely self-sufficient farms and gardens, immensely powerful weapons, the ability to travel in space, wait. Lex's eyes gleamed. Weapons. He couldn't believe it. Since the ship was an item that had been processed through the system, it was providing Lex with an accurate list of all the ship's functions, and there were definitely weapons in it. The strength and capacity of those weapons was to be determined, and like the medical equipment, would require trained personnel to use them. But it was still better than nothing. Various ideas ran through Lex's head. Using the weapons also required proper ammunition, so it wasn't as if they could be used immediately, but this would serve him well. He made a mental note to find the new spirit that had become a resident of the inn and ask him in detail about the ship using his Leo identity, of course. But he could not be distracted by random thoughts, he was focusing on the festival for now. Speaking of which, he thought of the perfect use of the ship during the festival. There was a sharp gleam that ran through Lex's eyes as he compiled his plans for this upcoming event. He would not do anything half-heartedly anymore. Even if his intentions for this event were just security, he would make sure that this would be something to remember. Occasionally missing content, please report errors in time. Chapter 442, A Moment of Peace. Lex spent many hours planning out the upcoming event. As it turned out, holding a 3-month-long festival was harder than it seemed. Many of the ideas he had could easily fit into just the first month, so not only did he need to find ways to stretch them out, he had to think up more ideas as well. Still, he had thought up the basic structure of how things would proceed and made room to include any ideas that he had at the moment. Yet planning out everything was only the first part. He sent the preliminary schedule of events to Mary, and had her distributed amongst the workers so that they should also know what to expect. Moreover, a monumental task was placed before the planning department. With them, Lex shared a more detailed version of the upcoming festivities and told them not only to design the decoration for the party village for the event, as well as the other areas which would be included in the festival, but had them do research on other popular festivals on the Henali portal. It could not be denied that he was heavily influenced by Earth's cultures and traditions in everything he did, and he did not blame himself for that. But it was now time to make an effort to step away, not only to be more inclusive of the norms of the origin realm, but to understand how he could cater to them better. By the time he was done, it was already late into the night, not that had any effect on the thriving nature of the inn. Whether the inn was lit up by the bright, artificial sun or illuminated under the soft yellow glow of the sea of sky lanterns, the guests were constantly on the go. Some were dining with friends, others were gambling at the Colosseum, while others still were using the inn's services in ways Lex never could have imagined. Children were waging an endless war against the bunnies at the daycare area. A crabman and a lonely desert farmer girl were falling in love by the lazy river. A patch of sentient grass and its older brother, a vine that extended under the entire inn, were spying on different guests, learning about the universe. In a giant, floating sphere of water that Lex had created above the Colosseum, a host of aquatic beasts were playing a game they called Blitz Sphere. It was basically underwater rugby. It was very soothing to watch, and Lex took a few moments to enjoy it. The inn had grown massive while he was in the crystal realm. He had been deprived of enjoying its subtle nuances, and only now that there was no impending chaos did he take a moment to take it all in. But, unfortunately, a moment was all he really had. He was a busy man, and the inn wouldn't run itself. Well, actually it would, but Lex still had work to do. "Tell me about the giant that wants to meet me," Lex said to Mary. "You didn't explain what happened." "Not much really happened, per se. When the creature appeared at the inn it was a fumbling mess. It couldn't even stand straight, and actually fell onto the spaceship before tumbling off." Gawain responded timely, preventing it from accidentally squishing some guests. "Afterwards, I can only describe what it did as hyperventilating, but fortunately, Gawain calmed it down. Afterwards it began asking Gawain a bunch of questions, mostly because it did not understand most things. It did not know what the universe was, so when the inn was introduced as a hotel for the universe, it was confused. So when Gawain started explaining to it what planets, star systems, and galaxies were, it immediately asked if it was possible to meet the owner or creator of the inn. It was very adamant, so far as declaring eternal servitude if the owner could grant him a wish. "I'm not sure what this wish is or what it wants, but a massive creature like that is hard to ignore. If he becomes an employee, he could be very useful, at least I think so. But it really depends on what it wants. Based on how it's been behaving, It seems like the creature is just beginning to learn how to use its body. If I had to guess, I would say it's a newborn, and if that's the case, it'll be even easier for it to get adjusted to the inn. Lex nodded and scanned the creature, only to receive a surprise. Name, and %error, %end. Age, and %error, %end. Sex, and %error, %end. Cultivation details, and %error, %end. Species, and %error, %end. Midnight and prestige level, 1. Remarks, this guest looks like he's really hard-headed. After a very, very long time, Lex encountered another guest, with various errors showing up when it scanned them. Lex's leading suspicion was that people who had errors were actually system wielders. If that was true, then this would be an amazing opportunity for Lex to ascertain the truth about it if Mary's guess about it being a newborn were true. He hadn't forgotten that system wielders could steal each other's systems to strengthen their own, the way he had done. If that was the case, this could also be a trap. But inside the inn, Lex feared no traps, so to him, this was an important opportunity to learn the truth. If he could prove the error message was the sign of a system user, he would have finally discovered a way to discover system users. After making sure to calm down his thoughts, Lex teleported over. His confidence did not make him overlook the fact that when Mary told him that only a system was another system's weakness, it worked both for him and against him. He was fully cognizant of the fact that anything could happen when facing a system wielder, so he entered his overdrive state before teleporting over. While it looked like Lex was going for a simple meeting, he was going over with a mindset ready for war. Chapter 443 Emotions. The ever-constant breeze was blowing gently over and around the rocky creature. The meadow where the creature sat in meditation was far away from the populated areas of the inn, and so was devoid of the hustle and bustle of the populace. Instead, only the sounds of nature accompanied it. Though the creature did not technically have ears, it could hear any sound that touched its rocky body. So it was not an exaggeration to say that it listened with its entire body: the sound of the rustling grass, the whisper of the wind, the flapping of birds' wings, and the cooing of the many doves that sat all over its rocky body. The creature did not have skin, yet it was very sensitive to the cool clouds that swam past its body. It did not have a nose, yet it could smell nature around in ways that it did not realize. There were other senses the creature had not had in its previous life, yet he felt them now. He felt the peace around him, felt the beauty awash him, felt life itself giving him a new chance that it had never even imagined. Yet for all the fortunes it had, how could it get over, in a single moment, all the lingering attachments of his previous life? With its eyes closed, it could remember clearly the summer days it spent in its previous life that were nowhere near as comfortable as the meadow it now inhabited. Yet it would trade this comfort in a single beat of a heart it no longer had, for the company it had kept in those days had been lost to it forever. In this field it had seen flowers of immeasurable beauty, yet the creature only recalled a spring it had once spent in a dirty village, pretending to be a commoner alongside the princess who he was sworn to protect. Even beaten and battered by the ordeals of life, with dirt on her face and sweat on her brow, she was more beautiful than any visage the universe could offer. What was the point of a second chance, when he was still attached to his failures in the first one? How could he satisfy the demands of the system that gave him new life, when the pain of defeat filled every fiber of his being? Again and again, its last moments in its previous life played in its mind. The nation was at war, the enemy was close at hand, they had prepared for battle, but everything went wrong too suddenly. Lubu had appeared to kill the princess within the safety of her own home, the guards were all dead, chaos had erupted. The creature remembered holding off the enemies to allow the princess a chance to escape, yet a blade had run through his heart, piercing him from the back. What had happened? Who had betrayed him? What became of the princess? For all the strength and might this new body contained, the creature suffered only through an anguished lament that it could not shed tears so that it may express some of its pain. I was told you wanted to meet with me. I hope this isn't a bad time. A voice cut through the silence of the night, and with a jolt, woke the creature from its desperate thoughts. When the creature opened its eyes, it saw a man in the air in front of its face, as if he was standing in the clouds. His voice had not startled the creature despite its suddenness, but rather, woken it up from its depression and washed it clean of the negative emotions that had a hold on it. Seeing that the creature was not responding, Lex continued. "Oh, I suppose I forgot to introduce myself. I am the innkeeper, the owner of this humble establishment. I hope you have been finding your stay at the inn to your liking." The creature shook its head forlornly and said, "I cannot enjoy much of anything right now." "Oh, is something wrong?" The creature did not reply immediately and only looked at the innkeeper, a mental struggle going on in its head. It was not inexperienced or stupid. It knew that some things should be kept to itself. But it was desperate, and that desperation slowly overwhelmed the parts of its rational mind that told it to keep its secrets close to itself. "The universe, it really is, too big," the creature finally said, letting out what Lex could only assume was a sigh and not what it seemed, a gale. "I do not understand it. Nor do I understand this form," it said, looking down at its rocky arms. "It is beyond me, and what I thought was possible. Yet I am alive and in need of answers. I was hoping that you, as someone who wields enormous strength and has created something so grand, could provide me with some answers." Lex looked into those earnest, rocky eyes. This was not what he was expecting. Even though the shape was different, in those eyes he saw a pain that was all too human. "I can only say that I will try my best to answer your questions. If your questions are sensitive, would you like to go somewhere more private before we have our discussion?" The creature nodded, and before it could get up to move, Lex teleported both of them to his office. During the midnight games, Lex added a feature to the inn that allowed creatures that were massive to shrink down in size automatically when they tried to enter buildings, so that they too could use all the inn's facilities. Otherwise, if Lex had to recreate every facility for every sized being, it would end up being quite tedious. The rock creature was also surprised by the sudden change in location and its size, but it quickly adapted. It seemed to grow even more assured in the innkeeper's power. "This is my second life," the creature began, getting right into the thick of things. Chapter 444 Reincarnation. The entire inn seemed to notice that the giant mountain creature had spontaneously disappeared. The disappearance itself had quite a mixed reaction, for some guests were relieved while others were disappointed. They were either afraid the creature would go on a rampage, or wanted the opportunity to take a picture in front of it. Most, though, didn't care one way or another what happened to it, as they thought it was quite normal to see unusual beings at the inn. Only a short while ago there had been a dragon living at the inn. But the creature in question itself did not care what people thought about its disappearance, nor did Lex, the person responsible for teleporting it away. The creature, instead, was solely focused on his story, while Lex had his entire focus on not losing his cool. The host attire was once again showing its worth by preventing Lex from showing his real emotions on his face when he heard what the creature had to say. "This is my second life," the creature began. "In my first life, I was just a normal human, a soldier working for his country. I lived, I fought, I died in that country, without ever experiencing something so strange as the universe. But when I died I don't remember what happened. All I knew was that one moment I was dying, the next moment I was waking up with my face buried in the ground. When I picked myself up, I had become this monster." "Are you sure you didn't have any strange, unexplainable encounters in your previous life? Such as some kind of magic jewelry, or discovering an ancient treasure, or entering a strange domain? Maybe you had a dream that did not really feel like a dream?" Lex was asking a question, not because he was familiar with reincarnation, he was not. It was something he had not considered too seriously, but now, with his knowledge, he knew that it was only a matter of preserving the soul. Well, there were probably a few extra steps involved that Lex didn't know, but basically he had seen enough to believe it. No, instead, the reason he asked was that he clearly remembered how significant the event of receiving a system was for himself. He had been literally assaulted by a shooting star, after all. He was searching for any similarities whatsoever to his own experience to determine if a system was involved. This was but one of the multiple strategies he had thought of. No, I don't think so. I mean, I don't remember. I was not superstitious in my past life, so even if I did have a strange dream, or encountered something unusual, I would have believed it to be a scam or trickery, and would not have paid it much mind. The creature paused to see if the innkeeper had any more questions, but he didn't. It continued. The only problem was, it didn't know how to say what it wanted. The thing. The creature became flustered, unable to form the question that he wanted. Do you want to ask how this happened? Lex asked gently. Or perhaps, is there something you want? No, I don't want anything. No, I mean, yes, I do want something, but that's not it. Was it even real? My past life, everything I remember, did it even happen? Can I go back, somehow? The last question was uttered using all of the creature's strength, for in its heart, metaphorically speaking, for it did not have a heart, the creature already suspected an answer. Lex contemplated his words carefully before he spoke. Do you have a name? He asked first, his voice calm but gentle. The question also woke the creature up from its stupor, reminding it that it had yet to introduce itself. Mingjia. I mean, in my last life, I was called Mingjia. Well, Mingjia, I'm sure everything seems very different to you right now. But as strange and fantastical as it is, some things will stay the same. Like I'm sure you know from your previous life, nothing happens without a reason. Crops will grow if you tend to them, and will die if you ignore them. Gems and precious stones can become valuable if polished, or become nothing more than a pretty rock in a child's collection if ignored. Light comes when the sun rises, and darkness falls as the sun sets. If you eat, you will satiate your hunger, and if you do not, you will starve. Some causes and effects are more complicated than the examples I have stated, but the principle remains the same. Believe it or not, even as vast as the universe is, reincarnation is not so simple a matter, especially with one's memories of the past. So, if this happened, then it was not an accident. It happened for some reason. Lex paused. He had been building up to his second probe about the system, but his own speech resulted in him having a realization about something completely unrelated. Everything has a reason, whether you understood it or not. Mingjia, however, mistook his pause as the innkeeper having completed what he wanted to say. Are you saying that I reincarnated, for some reason? To fulfill some grand purpose? Was it perhaps the will of God? Whether there is a purpose or not, only you can decide that. As for gods, I wouldn't put too much stock in them. No, what I meant was, since your question is about your reincarnation, to get an answer, we need to understand how it is you reincarnated. For like I said, it is no common ordeal. Only then can we begin to answer questions like if it's possible for you to go back to your world. Though one thing, unfortunately, is almost certain. Even if you find a way to return to your own world, you will not be able to return to your old life. After all, we cannot even say for certain how much time has passed since you died. Chapter 445, The Way of the Systems. Mingjia was not shocked by what he heard. After all, he had already had a long time to think about things before the innkeeper arrived. It was easy to assume that he reincarnated the moment he died, for it had felt that way to him. But with this matter, he was really out of his scope. While it was a possibility that not much time had passed, it was equally possible, and even more likely, that at least some time had elapsed between him dying and reincarnating. Unfortunately, the mere fact that there was a possibility that not much time had elapsed gave Mingjia hope, and that hope prevented him from moving on. The innkeeper said that the answer to his questions lay in finding the reason for his reincarnation, but to him it wasn't really a mystery. Although he did not understand where it came from, or even what its purpose was, his system literally called itself the reincarnated as a mountain system. This system, whatever it was, had directly resulted in his reincarnation. Moreover, it was giving him strange objectives, such as finding an optimal place to lay its foundation. Should he tell the innkeeper about it? If we figure out how it happened, even if I can't go back to the way things were, Can I at least find a way to go back to that planet? Lex paused and thought carefully about what he should say. The conversation veered into domains that he knew little about. After all, how was he supposed to trace what planet Mingjia was from? Sure, given time, Lex would spread the ends read far and wide. But how far was the planet that Mingjia was from? If he had to rely on chance, how long would it take? It is not so straightforward. After all, we do not even know what planet you are from or where it is. I'll be honest with you, going back will not be a simple thing. But, if my suspicions are correct, it's not the place that you long for, is it? Mingjia did not answer, but the answer was certain. I'll be direct with you, going back or finding the people you're searching for will not be easy. In fact, even if there is an opportunity, the only way you'll seize it is by becoming stronger, much stronger. Lex did not want to lie to Mingjia, but most likely, even if he ever found his previous planet again, it would take so long that whoever he was searching for would be dead. As far as Lex knew, once a person dies, their soul dissipates. But he'd seen enough of the universe to know that he shouldn't say anything with absolute certainty, because reality had a way of flipping it on your head. What if there really was an afterlife? Or what if there was a domain where all souls go to after people die? Heck, what if there was a heaven and hell system that collected souls from all over the universe? These were things that Lex couldn't possibly know, at least for the moment. But as time went by, and he grew stronger and his reach expanded, he was sure he would come in contact with them. So it wouldn't necessarily be a lie if Lex said that one day, he could provide Mingjia with the answers he wanted. But, and it may seem selfish to say this, what incentive did Lex have to help him? He could do it out of the goodness of his heart, for it wasn't costing Lex anything, but from the day Lex founded the inn, he knew that this wasn't something he could start doing. After all, why help Mingjia and not others? And if he started helping everyone he came across in need, Lex himself would become overwhelmed and become in need. Grow stronger? Mingjia asked in confusion. Of course he didn't understand. He'd never encountered cultivation. The only way he knew of growing stronger in his previous life was exercise, which would not nearly be enough. Yes, grow stronger, Lex affirmed. In the universe, there are ways of transcending the station of your birth, and becoming an overlord capable of swimming even in stars. It is known as cultivation, and it is a path open for the smallest of ants to the simplest of humans, though finding a suitable path may be harder for some than others. If you discover what caused your reincarnation, you could potentially also embark on the cultivation path. Lex paused and looked at Mingjia in the eyes as he absorbed the information he was providing. Of course, if you follow the path set for you through your reincarnation, it may lead you in a direction unfit for your goals. After all, what you want is the strength to look for your loved ones, but what the system wants may be something else. Lex observed Mingjia carefully as he spoke. This was yet another one of his probes. If Mingjia really was a system wielder, the mention of a system may alarm him and cause a reaction, or may even make him think systems were common knowledge and may openly admit to it. It was a vulnerability he possessed due to his lack of experience and knowledge of the universe. Yet if he was not a system wielder, Lex could easily explain that by system he was referring to the cycle that caused his reincarnation. After all, there was a very real possibility that this had nothing to do with a system. Lex still did not truly understand the depths of the universe, as had become evident by his recent failures. This was not the last probe that Lex had planned, but was definitely one of the more direct ones. Time seemed to slow down for him as he waited for a reaction. Mingjia did not disappoint. He had been looking down at his hands, lost in thought, but the mention of system caused face to snap up, locking eyes with the Innkeeper. Occasionally missing content, please report errors in time. Chapter 446 Spreading News. While Lex and Mingjia were having a conversation in his office, news of the upcoming event had already begun to spread. How could it not, when Lex himself set all the gears in motion? He paid for the event, activated the marketing, informed the workers and distributed responsibilities. But while all the responsibilities and tasks should have gone to his workers, there was one exception that also received orders, albeit in a more roundabout manner than the workers themselves. In the cold, dark void of space, a massive vessel moved silently in a straight line. This was an unusually empty region of space. There were no star systems nearby, no asteroids or space rocks, nothing. In fact, this particular region of space was far from everything and near nothing. Even when commuting to regions of space beyond it, there was no reason for a ship to roam these parts without using hyperspeed. All common sense indicated that there was no reason for this ship to be here, yet it moved forward with purpose. It was a large vessel, and a keen observer would notice the signs of it being freshly minted. It wasn't just the smooth and clean exterior that had not seen hundreds of years of age that gave away the vessel's age, but also the distinct lack of disturbance it created in the surrounding spirit energy, as thin as it was. This wasn't really modern technology, just that as a ship aged it would become harder and harder to maintain it regardless of the resources one had. Some deterioration in performance was unavoidable. On the bridge, the commander of this ship wore an extremely grim expression, and though he had his arms folded behind his back in a seemingly casual manner, his fists had been clenched tight. Silently, and without warning, the ship crossed an invisible veil and disappeared from view to the rest of the universe. Within the veil, though, was a massive space station the size of a small moon. Hundreds of vessels had been parked wherever they found free terminals, and thousands more seemed to hover in space waiting for their turn. But the new vessel did not wait for a turn, and immediately went to a specific terminal that nobody else seemed to venture near. In the vacuum it was impossible for noise to travel, yet a buzz seemed to fill the area nonetheless as everyone's eyes turned to the ship and in hushed tones whispered, "Booty has returned." Yes, First Mate Booty of the Ironheart Pirates, who had been rumored to have left the pirating life behind to instead become a marketing agent, had voluntarily returned home. This was bound to create a buzz. After all, who didn't know that First Mate Booty was the captain's favorite? Yet the news of his betrayal had not had any reaction whatsoever. Now his return sprouted only new rumors. What was really going on? Booty cared for none of it. He only looked forward as he stood still on a segway that seemed to lead him deep inside Heart Station. Eventually, he arrived in a dark room where he stepped off and bowed towards the darkness, his suede jacket pressing firmly against his chest. "You have finally returned. Are you here to take my head?" "Never, Captain," Booty shouted, sweat pouring down his pale face. "Then why have you returned? I thought you left the pirating life behind. You were too good for it, anyway." "Captain, I brought news. There's finally hope for you to enter the immortal realm." A golden key appeared in Buddha's hands as he began to explain about the upcoming festival and, more importantly, about the star rank increase. Due to his excellent performance in marketing previously, Lex made a special mention to his workers to give the job to Booty again. Little did he know that, instead of spreading the news, he had returned to the real captain of the Ironheart Pirates. She sat in the darkness, hidden from view. Her identity had to remain a secret at all costs. As if being a pirate wasn't enough, if people were to learn who the captain was, there would be no sanctuary left where the Jotun Empire had influence. In another part of space, a devil appeared in front of Loretta, sharing the same news. A breakthrough in cultivation was too great an attraction to overlook. Elsewhere, Ragnar was reading an emergency report. For once, hesitation appeared in his eyes. If he had a breakthrough, he'd be in closed cultivation for months, if not years. Was this really the time? In a med center on the galactic battlefield, an injured Alexander received new orders. His efforts had paid off. The Empire would invest in him, and help him recultivate from scratch, and his new journey would begin at the inn. In the Crystal Realm, Roland returned to share the news with Aegis. No matter what his personal decision was, this was not something he should overlook. On Earth, the Oracle Vera Joel was desperate to find a way to return to the inn, but her jailers had finally caught on and regularly searched her and others to make sure they had no keys. But how could she explain that for her? It was not just about gaining an opportunity, but escaping a catastrophe. If only her visions were more regular. In the realm of Garvets, some devils had returned to provide a report. Warhalhal Fednal, the devil solely responsible for creating the zombie demons, smiled. It was an opportunity for his children to grow. An agent of the Henali, who had been stationed at the inn, quickly retreated to deliver the news. Though, unlike the rest, this agent had no urgency. He worked for the overlords of the entire realm. Compared to them, how truly helpful could the inn's festival really be? Unbeknownst to Lex, who was going through revelations of his own, his festival that he only used for security was about to be far more successful than he could have imagined. Chapter 447 Payment. There was silence in the room as the two looked at one another. The innkeeper was as calm and stoic as ever, while Ming Jia was having rapid mood swings. First there was alarm, for he thought he had revealed a secret he was meant to keep close to himself. Then there was panic, as he realized that even if the secret hadn't been revealed, his reaction might have tipped off the innkeeper. Then there was ambivalence, as the innkeeper was not showing any reaction at all whatsoever, which led Ming Jia to wonder if he was overthinking things. A part of himself was also admonishing himself. He was not an inexperienced man, but his extreme emotions had made him vulnerable, otherwise he would not have made such a basic mistake. But what he needed to decide now was how to react. The innkeeper did not seem at all perturbed by the knowledge that he had a system, so maybe it wasn't a big deal at all. He spent a few more moments to collect himself and then recalled what it was the innkeeper had even said. Finally, filled with hesitation, Ming Jia asked, "What do you mean by a system wanting something else?" The focus was back on Lex, and so was the pressure. While initially he was probing, and had the discretion to lead the conversation in a different direction should Ming Jia not respond to his system about comments, he was the one being questioned now. He had been reassured, for Ming Jia's reaction was a strong indicator that he was a system wielder. He had not admitted it outright. If Lex chose to imply that by system he meant the cycle of reincarnation, he would lose out on the possibility of exposing Ming Jia. But if he continued and explained about systems as he knew them, but Ming Jia did not have a system, it would make the innkeeper look like he didn't know what he was talking about. It was a delicate situation, but Lex was not too perturbed. The reason was simple: he would only need to care what his perception was if they were conversing as equals, which they were not. Ming Jia was an uninformed, lost soul, while the innkeeper was a mysterious and powerful entity. Even if the conversation went in a direction that might make the innkeeper look imperceptive, he could spin the conversation by saying Ming Jia was too low level to understand what he meant. Systems are interesting entities. They wield enormous power, and even provide unimaginable assistance to their wielders. But, and this is the important part, to gain that assistance, you have to play by the system's rules. You have to follow the direction they set, and march according to their beat if you want their rewards. If you want to retain control, or even your identity, you have to be very careful about how you play along. Lex paused to see if Ming Jia had anything to say, but the mountain man was silently absorbing all that Lex had said, so he continued. Of course, having a system is not in of itself a bad thing. Like I said, as long as they are used carefully, they can provide you with immense shortcuts, and that can be the key to your growth. If you want to cultivate without it, you will have to search for a cultivation method for your new species first. It shouldn't be too hard, I'm sure it exists, and you could even use the inn services to look for one. But how much you'd have to spend to successfully find one, and moreover find one that is actually stable and even suits you, is a question you'd have to discover the answer for on your own. Lex was extremely tempted to directly ask, or at least hint at his curiosity at what Ming Jia's system was. But he had to remind himself that he had to maintain an aloof image. Systems were beneath him. The innkeeper had no need for systems. That was the image he had to maintain. Ming Jia ran through all the various options in his head. Without the system, he might not be able to get a suitable cultivation technique, whereas with the system he could cultivate but would have to act according to the system's requirements. After a while, Ming Jia asked, "Is there a way for me to turn back into a human?" Lex was genuinely stumped by the question. Was changing species even possible? Well, actually, Ming Jia had accomplished it somehow, so surely it was. That is not so simple. But, like I told you before, once you grow stronger and your cultivation reaches a high enough level, you'll be able to do things you can't even imagine right now. What if I give up my system? Will that change me back? Pure excitement ran through Lex's mind as he finally got the confirmation he was looking for, but his expression was still the same. Do you have reason to believe that your system is what's keeping you in your current form? Yes, it's called the reincarnated as a mountain system. What if I get rid of it? What if I give it to you? Can I turn back into a human? Ming Jia didn't know the worth of a system, but since it had immense power, it was surely valuable. If he could give the system as payment for the innkeeper's help, that would make things incredibly convenient. Besides, since it would take growing stronger to get what he wanted, wasn't an easier solution to just ask someone who is already strong for help? And who better than this mysterious innkeeper to ask for help? He was ready to give up on all his shortcuts if that's what it took. Lex, on the other hand, did not respond immediately. The temptation to absorb another system was great, but he couldn't bring himself to kill an innocent man just to get it. If he was giving it of his own accord, however. Mary, can I take his system without killing him? Chapter 448 Secrets. Mary, can I take his system without killing him? Lex asked mentally as he observed Ming Jia. If the system has not fused with his soul yet, it should technically be possible to extract it without killing him. But you would have to check his soul for that first. Before he continued, Lex used his connection to the inn delivered through the chair to scan the library of the inn. The first batch of techniques had been delivered by the Infinity Emporium, and Lex looked through them for any and all soul-related techniques. Though they were not many in quantity, it was only a relative number. He easily found quite a few he could use right now if he learned them, and even more that would become available to him once he reached the Golden Core realm. It was not a big deal if Lex had Ming Jia wait a bit before answering him, but the more important question to answer was: assume we can extract the system. Will it turn him back into a human? It's not a question that I can easily answer. But based on the name of the system, it only helped him reincarnate as a mountain, and is not keeping him in that state. Based on that logic, even if the system is removed, he should stay in his current form. That's what I feared. Lex reached the same conclusion on his own, but he wanted to ask Mary anyway in case she knew something more about systems. Although he had gotten an answer, Lex did not rush to reply to Ming Jia. He was considering the possibility of another option. The result of his previous risk with the Henali had made him reluctant to take risky actions. Yet at the same time, only by taking risks could he get maximum rewards. Mary, if I make him my employee, can I make his system a subsidiary of mine? Moreover, will he be able to find out that I have a system? Him becoming an employee will have no effect on his system whatsoever. But there is a chance that his system will have a reaction to your system, the way yours shows error messages apparently for other system users. It all depends on the rating of his system. The closer the system's rank to yours, the more likely it is to have a reaction. In fact, even if it's not close, because the Midnight Inn is not running at 100% functionality, and seems to be broken or damaged, chances are that his system will pick up on yours. If your system were running at full capacity, because of its high rating, most systems of lower ranks wouldn't be able to detect it at all. That was both disappointing and alarming. It was disappointing because Lex really wanted to upgrade his system further somehow, but he didn't want to get into the business of killing innocent people. It was alarming because John was a system user and had been at the inn for a long time. He didn't know if it was such a good idea to continue having him work here if it could endanger Lex's own secrets. But first he had to deal with the matter at hand. A few moments had passed since Ming Jia asked the question, and he was waiting anxiously for a reply. Most likely, Lex finally began to reply slowly, even if the system is removed, you will stay as you are. That is because the system was only responsible for reincarnating you like this, not keeping you this way. Ming Jia was disappointed because it seemed like the only possible option for him would be to follow along with his system. Going along with your system does not have to be a bad thing, Lex said, changing the conversation. Since he couldn't get the system, he had to make sure to build a relationship so he could keep a tab on Ming Jia. You just have to be careful how you interpret the direction it's taking you in. They can be more flexible than they seem. I will only give you 2 pieces of advice. First, do not be impatient. I don't doubt that you're in a hurry to grow stronger to achieve your goals, but cultivation is not a path that can be tread lightly. A single mistake can cost you immensely. Second, do not share the knowledge of your system with anyone. They are not as common as you may think, and not everyone will be as disinterested as I. Thank you, I will keep your advice and your guidance in mind, replied Ming Jia as he stood up. Even he understood that their conversation was at an end. What he needed to do now, before making any decisions, was take some time and calm down. He needed his emotions to stabilize so that he wouldn't make any rash decisions. Lex teleported him out to a secluded spot, though he was still visible from far and wide. Lex had to absorb all the new information he just received and decide how he would use it in the future. But first, he sat and mused over the recent realization he had. While explaining things to Ming Jia, in particular when he was mentioning that everything happens for a reason, even if you may not be able to understand the reasons, a random thought occurred to Lex. What if him getting the system was not as random as it appeared? Well, the truth was, Lex didn't actually believe for even a second that the system which could cause teleportations across the universe would stall and accidentally fall to him. But this time his thoughts went further. What if the secret his family was keeping was the reason the system had fallen, or perhaps even chosen him? This was wild speculation, for he didn't expect his family to have too large of a secret. He imagined something more along the lines of him not being their actual child and his parents being forced to adopt him for various reasons, or something like that. But what if it wasn't? He knew it was pointless asking Mary, for she would only say he didn't have the authority to know. But he began to wonder nonetheless. Chapter 449, Manipulating the System. Lex sat in his office ruminating over the system's intentions. He had not lied when he told Ming Jia that he had to be careful about following the system's direction, for the system would endlessly push him towards its own goals, but Lex had experienced firsthand how getting in over his head had caused him problems. Other than that, he also thought about the problem regarding his family. He was more than inclined to just ignore them, but just because he ignored them did not mean any problems they could cause would ignore him. Yet at the same time, he was not in the mood to go face them, or investigate himself. He also didn't want to use his resources at the end to investigate, because he did not know if the system had any relation to them. It was a headache all around. Come to think of it, it had been many months since he last saw, or even spoke to his family. He was sure that they would have noticed his absence by now, and would have picked up his anomalous behavior as of late. Going back now might lead to a confrontation, which was a separate issue. In the end, he sighed. This was not an issue he would solve any time soon. He also didn't want to discuss it with Mary. It wasn't that he didn't trust her, but he felt talking to her about any suspicions he had regarding the system would be redundant. He'd heard the answer she'd given enough times to know how that would end. Instead, he turned his attention to the next issue on the list. It was one that had plagued the inn for a long time, but one he didn't get around to solving, not only because he was extremely busy, but because there wasn't a clear solution to it either. Mary, I'm sure you already know this, but people have been using the inn's teleportation ability to cause a lot of harm. How can we fix this? Gaining control over the teleportation function of the system requires a higher authority, she said, with a hint of desperation in her voice. We can't wait for a higher authority, Lex said as he perused the system interface. Criminals and terrorists are using the teleportation feature in sensitive areas, using the inn as a hideout, and then teleporting back at the most inopportune moments to cause chaos. If this kind of behavior is allowed to continue, it will not only ruin the inn's reputation, but earn us a lot of unnecessary enemies. More than Mary's reply, Lex waited in anticipation for a system notification. He had long noticed how the system had a tendency to react to his conversations as long as they had anything to do with the inn, but this was the first time he was actively trying to use it for his direct benefit. The system, fortunately, stayed true to its previously set pattern. New quest: the host's attention to detail has spotted problematic behavior with some guests. Devise a holistic solution to the given problem. Rewards: temporary authority to adjust teleporting permission, fruit knife upgrade material. Remarks: some people, with great attention to detail, would also notice themselves having horrendous hairstyles. Rather than stressing about how, think of possible solutions first. What if the system checks if the location of teleportation is public property, or belongs to the guest teleporting? If they're teleporting to the inn from a private place, like someone else's home, or say a secure facility, when they get sent back, they're teleported to the nearest public space. There are too many ways that could go wrong. There are countless planets with toxic environments, and I'm sure many guests want to maintain their anonymity. What if changing their teleportation location sends them into a place with toxic fumes, or lands them in front of an enemy who is just crossing a random street? The probability is low, but it's also inevitable. Well, keep thinking of possible solutions. The only other thing I can think of at the moment is to prevent people from teleporting to the inn if their location is problematic somehow. But that in itself is hard to judge. After excusing Mary, Lex teleported away. The system's remark reminded him about Harry, so he decided to check up on him. In his private room, a pale-looking Harry was holding Haley's hand and softly talking to her. He had woken up a few days ago, and his soul had recovered completely, mostly due to the fact that the medicine used was meant for someone much stronger than him to begin with. The problem was his body. Although he had healed, his vitality was critically injured. It could not keep itself running for even a moment if he was taken out of the recovery pod. Fortunately, all was not bad, and Harry had an idea of how to remedy the situation. There was a soft knock on the door, attracting the couple's attention. They were not surprised, for countless visitors had paid short visits to check on Harry's health, from other workers to regular clients of Harry's. Haley opened the door and saw a rather handsome-looking man standing politely at the door. She did not recognize him as the innkeeper, for she had not seen him before, but she invited him in, nonetheless. "My apologies for my late arrival," the innkeeper said as he walked in the room. "I believe I also still owe you a wedding present." "Innkeeper." Harry was startled and tried to get up, but the innkeeper quickly dissuaded him. "Don't get up, you need to rest. I came to check up on your condition. I am very ashamed that you had to suffer such grievous wounds at the inn." No, it's not your fault, and you don't have anything to be ashamed of. If anything, I should be grateful. Nurse Jubilation informed me of how you personally had some medicine for me sent over." "It seems I did not send over enough medicine," the innkeeper mentioned as he observed Harry's weak physical condition. "Worry not, I will have something arranged. You'll be back to full health in no time." "No, innkeeper, you don't need to do that. In fact, I have been meaning to reach out to you myself. I want to build a serenity pond. It's something I learned about from the sorcery heritage you provided me with. With it, I'll be able to overcome my current situation on my own, and then I can even use it as a service I offer to guests." "Say nothing of it. I'll send Luther over, and you need only inform him of what you need." "Thank you, innkeeper, I'll prepare the list immediately. Be sure to rest well and recover quickly. You have done a great service to the inn. Once you've completely healed, I'll deliver your wedding present to you. You can look forward to it." Lex left immediately after. He could tell that his presence was forcing Harry to be more energetic than he could afford, and he did not miss picking up on the faint disapproval Haley felt for him. She did not show it, and had only silently stood in the corner while they talked, but could Lex be unable to detect it? Even if it wasn't for his incredible senses, the host attire made him even more sensitive to anything that was happening at the inn. Well, he couldn't blame her. Not only had he missed their wedding, but Harry had nearly died protecting his inn. It was only natural to develop a negative opinion about him. That was not taking into consideration the fact that whoever liked their spouse's boss? He sent Luther a message to have him collect the list from Harry and help him wherever he could, before he scanned the inn for the next target he wanted to meet. While Mingjia had attracted a lot of attention, and may seem like the most noteworthy guest that had arrived during his previous coma, there was one more guest that required his attention, the new spirit. Not only did Lex want to greet this new permanent resident of the inn, he even needed his help to figure out how to control the spaceship. Speaking of which, he should probably hire a permanent crew for the ship who can specialize in how to use it. He looked up at the massive ship and wondered how many people it would take to run that thing. It was several hundred miles just in length, and covered almost the entire length of the inn with its shadow. Lex shook his head and hired a single new worker for now, the person who would captain the ship. "Cirque reporting for duty, sir," said a tall, pale man with dark hair who appeared next to Lex. "Cirque, you'll be captain of that ship up there," Lex said, pointing up in the sky. "Now come on, you'll need to learn how to use it." Chapter 450 Tuition Fee. Beyond the grave was an extremely broken ability that the inn had gained, in Lex's opinion at least. While it did not completely revive a dying person, it allowed them to continue to exist, at least in some form, for a limited duration of time. When Lex first read about it, one of the fears he had was that once this became widely known, the inn would have more ghosts than actual guests. After all, people die every day, and if they discover a way to continue to live, even if it was for a short time, he expected many people would avail it. Yet his worries seemed unlikely, at least for the moment. This was due to the fact that the only guest who had used the ability so far had spent an enormous amount of money, a truly stupendous amount, and gotten 13,000 years. Most people, even if they were considered wealthy, probably could not match the wealth of this guest, so the amount of time they would stay would be relatively short. Still, this increased the pressure on Lex to yet again increase the size of the inn, and maybe create a specific zone that would attract his spirit residents, for he couldn't really force his guests to stay in a specific area. For that, first, he had to learn about spirits. Fortunately, the inn was now connected to the Henali portal, which had allowed him to conduct a search earlier on. The first thing that came to one's mind when someone said the term spirit was one of the three fundamental aspects of living beings. Spirit, when mentioned in the context of living beings in general, is what provides them with the ability to think and behave in certain ways. So then, what does it mean to exist as a spirit, or be from the spirit race? The answer was closer to Lex's original assumption of ghosts than he had originally realized. Spirits, or the spirit race, was a generic term used for beings which only had a soul and spirit, but no body. There were further specifications, for not all spirits were the same or had the same attributes. But as far as the inn's ability was concerned, it referred to the most common kind of spirit. They had no real shape, and were most commonly perceived as being balls of translucent sentient energy. Various professions such as oracles, prophets, mystics, and such often communicated with spirits for various tasks, for their ability to interact with energy without the energy changing form due to passing through a body gave them special insight and abilities. Generally, they could pass through any physical barriers, as they were nothing more than an accumulated clump of energy. They communicate telepathically, though they could still hear what other beings were saying due to the disturbance their voices caused in the ambient energy. They did not have the typical senses of touch, sight, hearing, etc., but rather a collection of their own senses based on energy fluctuations. Different spirits were formed of different energy types and usually stayed in areas dense with that specific kind of energy. Lex revised all this information in his mind as he scanned the inn for the new spirit, and found it in an extremely remote corner of the inn. In fact, let alone guests, there weren't even any birds or small animals in the area. Clearly he wanted to be alone, but Lex couldn't afford to wait, so he would have to intrude. He and Cirque teleported away, appearing at a patch of open area lacking most trees and bushes. It was just grass and some wild flowers, far from any road or path. A grayish translucent ball was hovering in the air just above the ground, not moving at all. Lex scanned the ball to see what he could learn about the guest. Name, Abror Kashinga Lilai, click to expand. Jamil. Age, 0. Cultivation details, none. Species, spirit. Midnight and prestige level, 1. Remarks, once a giant gray thing, now not a thing at all. Still gray, though. Lex was surprised, but not by much. He had been expecting Abror to show up at some point, and even suspected that he was the one who might have arrived. He just didn't expect that unusually sentimental guy to be so wealthy. I'm glad to see you could make it, said Lex. Although it's quite unfortunate that you were brought to such a state to begin with. I must do what is necessary for my race, my former race, Abror replied, his voice echoing in both Lex's and Cirque's mind. At least this way I can also watch over one of the few remaining members of my race as it grows. I can also teach it and give it guidance. Hopefully, I will complete my mission and rid us of our enemies before the young one has to face them. It might not seem like much to you, began Lex, remembering that Abror had originally been over 800,000 years old. But you have at least 13,000 years at the end to use. Hopefully, you'll have enough time to complete your tasks by then. Indeed, I hope. I am also grateful to you, Innkeeper. Were it not for your guidance, I would not have even had this refuge. I hope you find the inn to your liking during your stay. We have many activities going on here all the time, so I'm sure you'll be entertained. I also plan on adding some features to better cater to spirits soon. When the time arrives, please give me an honest review. I have no doubt that they will be magnificent. I will try, replied Lex with a smile. I hate to bother you when you have just arrived, but I was wondering if I could get some of your assistance with a matter. Please, do not hesitate to pass orders. I have yet to fully repay you for your grace of extending my life. There's no need to talk of repayment, you have already paid sufficiently for your time here. Consider this as doing me a small favor. This here behind me is Cirque. I plan for him to be the captain of the ship you have given me. I would appreciate it if you could teach him as much as possible about the ship. Consider it done. I will oversee his education myself, and will assist him until he is completely proficient in every aspect of the ship. Excellent. If possible, teach him as much as possible about the basics as you can in a week. I'm planning on using the ship during an event, though don't worry too much as the ship's involvement will be minimal. At the same time, I'm sending you some MP as well. Since you're going to be living here, and there's a festival coming up, you'll need it. Lex sent Abror 200 million MP, for now. While it may seem like an absurd amount, it had to be remembered that Abror was basically teaching Cirque how to pilot a massive spaceship. Lex honestly expected it to be a few years before a crew was ready to properly pilot the thing, so this was only the beginning. Considering how useful the ship would be to Lex in the long run, this was barely acceptable as tuition money. Lex was about to continue the conversation, but something happened which caused Lex to apologize promptly and teleport away. Cork and the gray floating ball were left alone, quite suddenly, possibly looking at each other. It felt awkward, because Cirque didn't even know if the ball of energy was looking back at him moreover. So can the ship beam us up or something? I'm not sure how else to get up there. I can't really fly. Lex had teleported back to his apartment and quickly sat down with his legs crossed in the meditation room. His cultivation was causing him issues. This was the first time Lex experienced such a thing, mostly because of how stable Regal Embrace was. Every other cultivator had plenty of experience with these things, mostly because their cultivation techniques were never able to stabilize spirit energy to the same level as Regal Embrace. Still, even when he was experiencing problems, his problem was extremely unique. His body and foundation were too exquisite, naturally pushing his cultivation to the next level. Sure, Lex could break through right now, and it would be a smooth breakthrough, but his instincts told him that breaking through when the star rating is being increased will benefit him greatly. So, while other cultivators struggled to maintain their cultivation and keep it from causing problems within their bodies, Lex had to struggle with his cultivation to keep it from naturally increasing. It was a lot harder than imagined, and left Lex physically and mentally exhausted. He had to wait 2 more weeks before he could break through, and something told him it would be a long wait. Chapter 451 1 week. The following week was both extremely long and unbelievably short for Lex. The system took care of so many aspects of each event for Lex that he really had no trouble hosting an event, yet at the same time that ease is what got in the way of making an event perfect. Since Lex, as well as all the workers, were so used to the system doing all the work, they never really put any thought into putting in that extra bit of effort to push them from great to mind-blowing. This time though, Lex wanted to focus on not only all the small details to make it perfect, he had to make sure there were no issues either. Moreover, while a grand spectacle was good to amuse large crowds, he wanted his guests to experience being personally involved as well. The first thing that was required was the planning division's research on events in the origin realm. As it turned out, due to the nature of cultivation, and the longevity that it brings, all events were usually paced out and happened over long periods of time. Moreover, there was a clear period of momentum that the festival would build up during that long time, culminating in the perfect finale. In an ideal scenario, that grand finale should have been the peak of the festival, but for various reasons Lex could not afford to do that. Still, all was not at a loss for Lex, still found a way to spin things. The idea of an event, or a festival focused around cultivation was not new, and while all the events in them had to do with distributing cultivation resources and breakthrough opportunities, in contrast to Lex's event that was full of carnival-style activities, they also had a clear pattern Lex could follow. The higher the cultivation, the longer period each person would spend in retreat after each breakthrough. In that case, a 3-month event was ideal. In fact, it could even be longer, depending on cultivation levels. There were precedents for events that lasted years and even decades. Of course, they also had a long waiting time so that everyone could adequately prepare for them. So, with that in mind, Lex started designing various abodes for the perfect cultivation retreats. Normally, a meditation room would suffice, but when spending weeks or even months in retreat, it was common to have a larger area, even a mansion that afforded both an ideal cultivation environment as well as a peaceful and calm ambience to soothe the mind. The planning division brought Lex hundreds of examples, and he began working on them immediately. One of the more popular options was a cultivation cave, for whatever reason. Built into the side of a mountain, it gave the illusion of a sturdy and secure base where one can retreat without worry. While the interior was well designed for functionality and comfort, from the outside its entrance would be completely hidden. Not only did Lex design them, he designed multiple iterations of them so that guests could choose whatever layout they preferred. Next were mansions with thick boundary walls and multiple gardens and courtyards inside, filled with fruit trees and beautiful flowers. Penthouses were also pretty popular. Lex did not want to build multiple high-rises just to build penthouses, so he directly created penthouses in the sky at various levels. Not only were they filled with high-tech equipment and luxuries, they could be turned invisible from the outside. There were dozens more abode styles such as on the ground, underneath the ground, in the water, camouflaged, moving, etc. that Lex designed. They also provided Lex with a newer understanding of common cultivators, which was that they were an insecure bunch. He couldn't blame them, he himself was always worried about being attacked as well. Maybe they were not so different. While doing this, Lex also increased the size of the inn by a massive 100,000 acres for 1 billion MP. While the newly added land was mostly empty, it was not going to be that way for long. Lex added rolling hills, plains, plateaus, lakes, and more. The massive size of land seemed pretty small when he started adding such massive physical features, but he had to do the bare minimum. That was because, soon, the new minor realms would finish attaching to the Midnight Inn. Lex had already checked what the result of that would be. Their physical land would not get added to the inn, nor would they become domains of the inn. Instead, an opening to each minor realm would randomly become available throughout the inn. Lex did not know the exact number of minor realms, but he suspected they should be less than 100,000, right? That way, there would be one opening every few acres, which would be enough for a secret hunt. While Lex would not be able to control the minor realms, he would have perfect control over their entrances. Therefore, his plan was to keep them shut and slowly start opening them when he started an event where guests would be allowed to explore the minor realms, at their own risk of course. But first, they would have to look for the entrances, which Lex planned on hiding. While he was at it, Lex hid numerous treasures and small rewards all across the inn's terrain. The last time he did this, Lex could hide naught but bottles of bought lamb dew and a few other rewards. Now, however, Lex hid anything and everything available. From weapons to foods to MP packets to special tokens that awarded free stays at the various rooms the inn had available to more, Lex turned the inn into a massive treasure hoard. Of course, these treasures he hid a little more carefully. He wouldn't tell anyone about them either. Luck would play a role in deciding who got what. While doing all of this, Lex had to combat his own progressing cultivation, and it was definitely a battle. It was in those moments where he learned the meaning of desperation. It reminded him of an old memory, where he needed to use the restroom really badly, but there was none available for another 10 minutes. Each and every second back then had lasted an eternity, so much so that Lex was still traumatized by the event. Now, he was going through another version of that. Chapter 452 Decor. The preparations for the festival went far beyond preparing a few abodes and expanding the regions, speaking of which, he allocated a 100 acres flatlands far from all current attractions and gave it exclusively to the gardener so he could finally complete his landscaping artwork. Of the numerous other tasks, both minor and significant, that Lex did, decorating the inn was one which required more of Lex's time than anything. The inn had to look both festive yet at the same time calming and beautiful. Making the inn look mirthful was obviously important, for the festivities would feel incomplete otherwise. Yet, since cultivation was a big theme as well, an environment which soothed the mind was imperative. After all, cultivation, while sometimes comfortable and relaxing, could also be strenuous and overwhelming. As such, it was extremely important to maintain a calm and collected state of mind. While most of that work would obviously be undertaken by the cultivator themselves, creating an environment conducive to the task was the bare minimum one could do. As such, they decided that dense population areas would be decorated according to the ongoing activities, but the further one got from places such as the village and Main Street, the more soothing the environment would be. This was the area where the planning division's prowess showed. While Lex would have ended up recreating decor derived from earthen culture, they incorporated ideas from multiple planets. Lights were hung up across buildings, though they were not connected through wires or actually connected to the buildings. Using some advanced technology from the Vegas planets, an invisible pathway was laid out over all the buildings along which the colorful lights flowed like water traveling down a stream. Only, they were not limited to just different colors. Beautiful designs and patterns were intricately formed, changing at random as they traveled across the buildings and streets. Immersive tags were created which would be passed out to the guests, and depending on where they were and what activities they were watching or participating in, they would see different decor and hear different music. Two people standing side by side who were focused on separate events would have differing experiences in every sense. Recalling some of his education from back at the academy at the Crystal Realm, Lex knew that even spirit energy could have different accents or scents, and enhance a person's aura and presence, though usually it was something that had to be consciously cultivated. He integrated that feature into each and every part of the inn, so each place would genuinely feel unique in every sense. Moving further away from the crowded areas of the inn, the kind of decor changed. Instead of lights and music and such designed to entice and invigorate the senses, the focus here was more on nature and natural energies. Lex was once again limited in his ideas, which included planting blooming cherry blossom and almond trees. Entire fields with trees full of pink and white flowers filled the inn. Jasmine shrubs were planted in the wild and near winding paths, filling the inn with their pleasant scent. The planning division, who had obviously done their research, took things a step further and gave Lex a list of other flora to add. An entire forest of trees with purple crystal leaves appeared, which grew gems and diamonds instead of fruits. Massive flowers, that were taller than trees with stems thicker than an ordinary man were grown, dotting the landscape. These flowers, which looked awfully similar to sunflowers, grew leaves in a peculiar spiraling design around the stem, acting as a staircase for anyone to climb the top. The natural scent was extremely refreshing and had a natural purifying effect on the environment. A number of peculiar shrubs were also planted, with yellow and orange-colored leaves instead of green. Yet the color of their leaves was not their peculiarity. No, instead, at night the shrubs would shrink and absorb all their leaves until they formed the shape of a random animal, after which the shrub would relocate. Furthermore, upon the request of the division, despite Lex's reluctance, he added a number of insects to the inn. Although previously he had stuck to butterflies, since they were obviously beautiful, this time he added a list of insects which, surprisingly, immediately made the inn better. Honeybees and ladybugs Lex was familiar with, but the rest were small and beautiful critters that came from various other planets. They did not look creepy, but instead took the shape of fairies, of flowers, of orbs of light and more. As if that was not enough, the way they interacted with the plants released a natural accent into the surrounding spiritual energy, hinting at the fact that the inn was finally developing an ecosystem that was not completely dependent on the system itself. Of course, none of these plants or insects just randomly appeared. Back when Lex had to bring in animals and trees from Earth, he had to get seeds or bring a few specimens in first before the inn could replicate them. It was the same now as well, the only difference being the use of the guild room made it, so he didn't have to source these things himself. Which was good, because even all of these were just some of the things that went into the preparation for the event. Yet ultimately, through the assistance of the system, the workers, and some extra effort on his part, everything went smoothly. The week finally passed, and only a few hours remained before the event began. A massive crowd had already gathered at the inn, not that Lex had to cater to them himself. He was currently focused on keeping his cultivation steady. In his meditation room, a shirtless Lex could be seen balancing his body only on the tip of his middle finger. His body was raised vertically in the air, and beads of sweat rolled down his body as he did continuous push-ups with only his finger. In the background, the camera that was recording him was completely irrelevant, and the tiny spray bottle filled with artificial sweat, the tiny spray bottle filled with water, had absolutely nothing to do with his current actions. Yes, he had merely sprayed water on himself to cool down, and not because his incredible, amazing physical prowess made it difficult for him to sweat under normal conditions. He was merely using physical exercise to keep his body strained and prevent it from breaking through, yes. Lex definitely had not considered starting a calisthenic YouTube page in his free time at all. He really did not have the time for that. Chapter 453 One final detail. Lex, will you come for the opening ceremony? Mary asked, as she appeared in his meditation room. Although his shirtless state made her feel slightly embarrassed, she had encountered him admiring his abs enough times to learn to ignore it now. It was not something he could explain to her. As someone who always wanted abs, but had never achieved them, the excitement he felt whenever he saw them was not something that would wane easily. Moreover, after the latest series of body sculpting, as Lex called it, carried out by the Lotus, his body looked even more impressive. The greatest tragedy was that usually he would either be in Leo form or as the Innkeeper, so the universe was deprived of his dashing good looks. Not for this, Lex answered as he lowered his body to the ground and finally sat down. As the Innkeeper, if I make an appearance for every little thing, then it would be considered a waste of my time. I'll make an appearance when I'm about to use the star increase token. In fact, there was one more reason why Lex was avoiding making a public appearance. Though a lot of time had passed by, he was still not able to adapt to his new physical strength completely. The push-ups he was doing earlier were actually a part of his training regime to improve his control over his strength and balance. If it were a minor issue, Lex could still ignore it, but he had accidentally snapped a tree during the last week, and he didn't want to take such a chance with a guest. Send Luther to give the opening speech, he should be able to handle it. I made a small mistake with the timing, so the hired security personnel will only show up once the event actually starts. Make sure to brief them immediately and have them spread out across the inn. Have someone from the inn's security team with them at all times so that if they need to teleport in case of an incident, they can. Although the event would actually begin today, the first week was more of a soft opening, with the real purpose being to give others enough time to come to the inn in time for the star increase token to be used. As such, while no major activity was planned during this time, there were countless small ones. There would be countless tournaments that would span the week, starting from traditional card games such as poker, to more niche games that involve trading cards. There would also be actual sport competitions, including various sports from Earth as well as other planets. Video game and virtual game tournaments were, of course, also being held. There would also be an art competition, with various fields such as painting, sculpting, gem forging, which was a thing in the universe apparently, and more. Other than competitions, there would be countless stalls set up across the inn filled with games and activities. There would also be a number of lucky draws, awarding guests MP prizes and free stays at the inn, musical and theatrical performances, local markets which would actually allow guests to set up stalls and, finally, firework competitions. Of course, they would not be real fireworks, but illusions cast by cultivators. Still, they would be judged for their beauty and performance. While such events would continue all 3 months, Lex had planned other larger and more significant events later on, to keep things interesting. This should keep things interesting and keep his early guests satisfied until the main event starts. While Lex was not making an appearance at this time, it did not mean he would be ignoring the event. He took a quick shower before he dressed up in his host attire and teleported to his office. From his chair his connection to the inn would be increased, and would allow him to respond to any developing situation immediately. By the way, did you think of any good solutions to the teleportation issue? That was something he wanted to resolve before the event began, whether he had a perfect solution or not. He could not afford any mistakes when potentially millions of guests were about to arrive at the inn. He and Mary had exchanged multiple ideas over the course of the past week. The best solution, for now, I think is the one we discussed about authorization. When a guest is returning, the inn should determine if the guest has the authorization to go to the location he is teleporting to. If not, he is teleported to the nearest area that he does have the authorization for. It's too vague. What if they get teleported to the vacuum of space? We'd be killing off our guests. Lex sighed. In fact, there were proper solutions to this, but the issue was that the inn's teleportation ability seemed incredibly powerful, but was actually severely stunted. To teleport to and from anywhere, the system required an anchor. The planets that were connected to the system were anchors, and any place a guest teleported from automatically became anchors, but anywhere else in the universe was not an anchor. This was information he received when he previously tried to edit the teleportation ability. Apparently, once the system recovered some more, this issue would get easier to resolve. Until then, Lex wrote a long and as thorough document as he was able detailing a safe way to use the authorization technique Mary previously described. He tried to cover as many possible loopholes as possible that would end up killing or harming the guest or anyone else, and provided as many fail-safes as possible. Once he was done, he submitted it to the system and completed his quest. The inn's teleportation ability had been slightly altered. Hopefully it wouldn't cause any issues. On the bright side, his latest reward allowed him to upgrade his butter knife once again. His last upgrade had converted it into a fruit knife and allowed him to one-shot golden core cultivators at the inn. He was looking forward to seeing what the next upgrade would bring. Chapter 454 Pacifier. A 10 feet wide, bronze-colored watermelon appeared on Lex's desk, as if it was the most ordinary thing in the world. Lex, too, did not show an abnormal reaction to the massive watermelon, and simply summoned the fruit knife and dug deep into the watermelon. The massive watermelon began to glow, as massive, bronze watermelons normally do when they are being absorbed by a magical knife, to upgrade itself. The process would take some time, so Lex brought his attention back to the inn. A scan of the inn right before the event began showed a little under 1 million guests. Even if not a single extra guest showed up, and he maintained this number of participants for the entire 3 months, Lex would make 4.5 times more MP than he spent on the event just from the room rent. Just that thought put a smile on his face. The opening ceremony took place at the Colosseum in the village and featured Luther giving a long and meaningful speech. This was already different from how Lex would have done things. Back when he hosted the Midnight Games, not a single one of speeches went longer than a few minutes. Still, that wasn't a bad thing. There are different expectations from different people, so for Luther to give a long speech that enticed the emotions of those listening was not only a good thing, it was exactly what was expected of him. The end of the opening ceremony was marked with exploding lights and a musical performance by one of the flocks of musical avian beasts who performed during the Midnight Games. But, more importantly, it was also marked by an exhibition fight between 2 golden core cultivators, which got a much more enthusiastic response. These included some of the preparations Lex had to make in advance during the past week. Many things the system could take care of, but coordinating the schedules of actual people, it could not. Of course, the system made it very simple to hire them, so he wasn't complaining either. While keeping up with all the activities, and the guests who were mostly focused in the village at the moment, Lex also checked up on the hired security. Thousands of golden core, hundreds of nascent realm and dozens of Earth immortal humans showed up, and quickly changed into the suit and tie uniform of the inn. Like previously, there was one cultivator above the Earth immortal realm, but it was not a dragon this time. Instead, it was a griffin. The creature had the body, tail and the rear legs of a lion, yet the face and wings of an eagle, with talons instead of front paws. Also, it was massive, with a height of nearly 40 feet, and a wingspan of nearly 200 feet. The griffin proudly perched itself on top of the spaceship, and surveyed the area with its head held high. Lex was genuinely impressed, and even wondered for a moment where these hired guards came from. Perhaps he'd ask them using his Leo persona later, but for now he continued to survey the inn. Some familiar faces that he hadn't seen in a while started popping up. Alexander reappeared, though he was seriously injured and went directly into the recovery pod. Lex did not fail to notice that Alexander's cultivation had regressed, and he was once again in the chi training realm. It was unusual and Lex even thought something went wrong, but he did not look upset or alarmed. He also saw Chen-Li and Lily, as well as Blaine and Iris. Chen and Blaine were some of Lex's oldest guests, and in fact had arrived at the inn being dragged in by a zombie. How things had changed in just a single year. Chen and Lily were wealthy from running their business, and Blaine had gotten married to his girlfriend Iris. They were having a reunion at the inn, catching up and sharing details of their new lives. He saw Golden Hair, the sloth of Nibiru, followed closely by Green's Haven, the deer, and Blood Fong, the wolf. He remembered the massive pressure he had felt the first time he saw them. Back then, he couldn't even view their cultivation levels due to his low authority. Now, of course, he could see that they were at the nascent level, with the sloth being an Earth immortal. While scanning the inn he also discovered Larry, and while he was going to continue scanning the inn, he heard them having an interesting conversation. Larry was sitting next to a few other guys, planning how to kill someone called Suzuki. Well, apparently, the other person wanted to kill Larry first, so Larry wanted to kill him before he could get the chance. The problem was the guy in question had a very powerful follower who always obeyed his orders, and it was difficult to find him alone. Lex noticed how, from time to time, Larry would lick his lips and stare at the spaceship, but did not focus on it too much. Instead, he looked for the person Larry wanted to kill, and actually discovered him at the inn. He also discovered the... Lex froze. He had scanned both the man and his follower to learn more about them, but the follower's status was showing up with the all too familiar asterisk and %error, % and asterisk sign. Why was he, as a system wielder, another man's follower? Before Lex could think of an answer, he once again scanned the entire inn. Only this time, he was specifically looking for the error message in scans. Other than John and Ming Jia, of whom he already knew, there was another girl with the familiar error message. Countless ideas flashed through Lex's mind as he thought about what to do, or if he should do anything at all, to begin with. Mary, send Larry a message through his hologram. Tell him about the murder ground, and how he can challenge someone to a 1 versus 1 battle to the death there. A few different ideas had occurred to Lex over why a system wielder would be following a normal person. But regardless of what the answer was, if Larry tried to fight him, Lex did not see great odds for his survival. In that case, a fight directly with the man in the murder grounds was the best option, if a confrontation was inevitable. Also, Mary, send a message to Velma. I want to know everything about these two people she can discover. The two people were, of course, Suda, the wielder of the samurai system, and the girl who was accompanying JFK. While he made a mental note to keep an eye on them, he could not focus on them completely. After all, he had an entire event to monitor. Oddly enough, the next two to attract Lex's attention were some of his own workers. Anita, the beautiful lich, and Kawain, the sentient sword, had asked for the day off and were on a date. Considering that Lex anticipated additional security, he didn't see any reason why he couldn't give them a break. So the fact that they were together, and on a date, wasn't what attracted his attention. Instead, it was the fact that behind Anita, a group of her undead were pulling along a massive stroller. Inside the stroller was a creature Anita was claiming to have adopted, and the member of his own race that Abruptly had brought to the inn. Even without the need for a scan, Lex recognized the creature, for Lex had been doing research on the more common, as well as the famous races of the Origin realm via the Henali portal. Still, to be sure, he scanned Anita's new adopted child anyway. Name, none. Age, 03. Sex, male. Cultivation details, golden core equivalent. Species, Cthulhu. Midnight and prestige level, 1. Remarks, even living nightmares start out as babies. It was as he thought. The creature was from a race called Cthulhu, the terrors from the great depth of the unknown universe. Before their mysterious disappearance a few 100,000 years ago, they were responsible for the destruction of hundreds of galaxies. According to rumors, they were so terrifying that if one were to even look at them directly, they would lose their sanity and die from pure fear. Their voice alone, apparently, could cause the souls of those who heard it to wither and die. Instead of food, these beings fed on pain, fear, anguish, desperation, and all sorts of negative emotions. No one knew how or why their presence from the realm disappeared one day, but the fact that it did is still celebrated across the realm. Yet despite their apparent disappearance, one was being raised right here, at the Midnight Inn, adopted by its foster mother, of Lich. Lex could not help but sigh as he wondered if the system would automatically keep guests safe from the horror of the baby's cries, or if he should gift the unusual couple a pacifier capable of pacifying the eldritch horror that was their new child. Chapter 455 Spaceship Upgrades. In truth, Lex was not that worried. The system had always been reliable when it came to blocking passive attacks, so neither the sight nor the sound of the baby would cause any insanity. Though Lex could not account for anyone's loss of appetite. The baby, who was fast asleep, was a little over 25 feet, 7.6 meters, in height. Its humanoid form did nothing to make it more amenable to the eyes, for the scaly tentacles that came out of its face took more than a bit of effort to ignore. The wings that spread out from behind its back might have given it a semblance of cuteness had they not been tipped with points hard and sharp enough to tear through metal. As if all of that was not enough, then came the smell. Anita, as a new aspiring mother, did not lack for research in raising kids, and while she did her research, she learned of the common practice on Earth to powder babies to help prevent rashes. As such, the dichotomy of the horror-inducing sight, alongside the welcoming and pleasant smell of baby powder, was enough to confuse and horrify anyone. Lex shook his head and turned his attention elsewhere. Since this was a festival, there were obviously many who brought their kids along. For those who wanted to keep their children on their own, there was an entire inn filled with attractions to partake in. Yet Lex did not forget those who only wanted to drop off their kids, or wanted to roam separately from them. One would think that to cater to such a situation, Lex would have just brought the festivities to the daycare area, yet that was not so. It was too obvious, and too boring. No, Lex had turned the entire spaceship into the new daycare. The first thing to do was adjust its appearance just a bit. Truth be told, its size was so massive that it was hard for anyone to get a good look at its entire body from so close. Still, that did not mean Lex would ignore that aspect of it. He did not disgrace the ship by making it colorful or plastering cartoons over it. No, he first cleaned up the ship, for signs of wear and use were evident to anyone who paid attention. Once he restored the proper sheen of the silver vessel, in close collaboration with the planning department who cross-checked against thousands of other spaceships, he added various weapons, though of course they did not work and existed only for appearances, aesthetic curves, and overall made it much more appealing to look at. There was also an upper and lower deck found on top and at the bottom of the ship made of a transparent material like glass, but much more resilient, which Lex improved and made comfortable for anyone who would want to sit and enjoy the view. Of course, there were restaurants and cafes found in every corner as well. The real changes that Lex made for the kids, however, were inside the ship. The automated, accelerated transport system for the crew of the ship was all too easy to modify using the system and turn into infinite slides and roller coasters of sorts. The self-maintenance and cleaning feature was extremely useful and worked everywhere, so Lex did not hesitate to turn the various portions of the ship into mazes and playgrounds. The anti-gravity and space combat practice chambers were retrofitted by Lex and turned into an extreme tag zone. The self-sufficient farms of the ship were kept mostly intact, but Lex made areas where kids could play in the dirt, or try their hand at farming if they wished. There were swimming pools that seemed to never end, all with convenient, underwater breathing equipment readily available, so Lex did not forget to add underwater rides and playgrounds either. Of course, not all kids were hyperactive and wanted to play all the time, and for them there were cozy areas with toys, food, sofas, beds, and more. The rabbits were in charge of running this new daycare yet again, much to their dismay. Lex, however, thought the idea would work out quite well. And it did. The reaction to the newly upgraded spaceship/playground was so overwhelming that a multitude of adults wanted to join in as well. Well, so long as they didn't bother the kids, Lex saw no reason to stop them. It had to be mentioned that the ship's own internal security system was extraordinarily impressive. That, alongside the extra hired security, ensured that the kids would stay the safest in the entire inn. Of course, using more of the ship's features increased Lex's expenses. After all, he did not have an appropriate energy source for the ship, and so powered it with MP. Still, since the use was barely 1%, if even, of the ship's capabilities, so the expense was bearable. The popularity of the spaceship playground that Lex had built was only matched by the popularity of all the festival's activities, if only just. All in all, the festival seemed to be going incredibly well. As if that was not enough, hardly anyone was causing any problems, so it almost seemed as if security wasn't needed. Lex just thought his luck was turning up, but it had more to do with the hearth burning the souls of his enemies right at the entrance of the inn than Lex realized. It was both a warning to any troublemakers, as well as reassurance to guests with security concerns that the inn was not a place that just anyone could cause problems at. A few hours passed by, and all seemed to be going well when Lex got the news that Larry had decided to challenge Suzuki in the murder grounds. The murder grounds were a new feature his inn gained after Lex killed the man with the murder system. Its original ability allowed Lex to target anyone so long as they were on a planet connected to the inn, and teleport both the target and himself to the murder ground. Lex had to be physically touching someone to target them for the murder ground. Once there, both of them would be trapped there until one killed the other. There was no recourse. But it had gained an additional feature, which allowed Lex to rent the murder ground out so that anyone with a feud had a neutral location to resolve it. The concept was the same, and neither party would be able to leave until the other died. In the case of renting it out, entire armies could be brought in instead of just a 1 versus 1. Of course, when renting, both parties had to consent to using it. Lex scanned the inn, and found Larry confronting Suzuki in public. A few people had stopped to watch the drama, though most seemed to be passing them by. "Oh, come now, Mr. Larry. Is there a need to go so far? I told you, we both have much to gain. I have a lead on your family, and you can help me pursue my own goals if you help me with that. Why are you letting rumors spread by some strangers get in between such a lucrative deal? You don't need to give me a speech, you just need to tell me if you accept. You'll never get a chance such as this to fight me again. Of course, the only premise is, you'll have to fight me yourself instead of relying on that lackey of yours. Larry, naturally, would not make such drastic decisions if he only had to rely on the information given to him by Anakin. It was just that, once Anakin gave him the information about Suzuki, it was easy for Larry to verify it on his own. After all, Larry himself was more than just adept at using computers, and had access to all sorts of networks and databases. Suzuki finally stopped smiling, and looked at him with a semblance of irritation. This one stupid bounty that he had accepted had taken up months of his time. Moreover, he saw no other method to resolve it any time soon either, for Larry either kept hiding at the inn or in King Marlowe's house. Both were places where he could not afford to make a move. Fine, brat. I accept your challenge. A small, digital window appeared in front of both of them, detailing the rules of the murder grounds and asking them if they were sure they agreed. After they both selected yes, they received another prompt, asking if they wanted their match to be streamed live. Without hesitation, both of them selected no. Suzuki wanted to keep his identity and occupation secret, while Larry had secrets of his own to keep. After that, both of them were teleported away. Of course, Lex could still view their battle himself, and saw that they had both appeared in a familiar set of ruins. In fact, not only was it familiar, the damage from Lex's battle with the murderer was still there. The two did not waste time sightseeing and immediately began their battle, and one of them had an immense advantage right from the get-go. Lex's eyes widened as he struggled to understand what he was seeing. Chapter 456 It's a Party. It was not the fact that Larry was in the Golden Core realm that surprised Lex, although that in itself was an achievement beyond unbelievable. After all, Lex himself had a cheat-like system and access to multiple worlds and realms and beings of unimaginable power, yet he himself was only now about to enter that realm. Yet Larry, who did not have a system and was trapped on Earth, except when he was at the inn, had somehow surpassed his speed. In fact, not only was his speed in reaching the realm remarkable, based on the fight, Lex could tell that his cultivation was not shallow either. He possessed strength that could not be achieved by someone who had only rushed his way through cultivation using resources. He was also not surprised at the enhancements Suzuki displayed on his body. Sure, he was not expecting that Suzuki's hand was a prosthetic, and that it quickly and conveniently turned into some kind of energy machine gun fueled by spirit energy. The blue light in his eyes and him jumping dozens of feet in the air also insinuated that there might be more technological advancements hidden in his body, or just that he had strange techniques. No, what surprised Lex was Larry's fighting style. First of all, he was taking all the attacks without any indication of wanting to dodge at all. That was something Lex should be doing, considering his overwhelming confidence in his defense, yet Larry was behaving the same. The barrage of green energy balls that were slamming onto his body had eviscerated his clothes, but did nothing to a single one of his hairs. As if that was not enough, as Larry rushed towards Suzuki, he pulled an entire sword out of his hand. Literally. Using his right hand he touched his left, and when he pulled his right hand back, a full-length sword started coming right out of the palm of his hand. The sword shone with a silver light, and cut through the air with a sharp, sheen sound. Suzuki dodged effortlessly, and more unexpected and bizarre weapons started coming out of his body. Lex put a popcorn in his mouth. When did that box of popcorn appear? Even he didn't recall, and watched with great interest. He also compared this fight to his own that had been fought in the very same place. While every single move Larry and Suzuki took was much more destructive, he felt like there was a lot more going on in his own fight. From strange mind tricks, to illusory attacks, to the weird luck that the murderer had, there was a lot going on that Lex had to overcome. Comparatively, this fight was more straightforward. Even if each attack packed much more strength. Lex wanted to lament the difficulty of fighting a system wielder, but he knew that he should not underestimate others either. He recalled the numerous abilities and techniques Alexander put on display back at the Midnight Games when he himself was only in the Foundation realm as well. Lex was not ashamed to admit that even now he probably knew fewer techniques than Alexander. It couldn't be helped, Lex had only been cultivating for a year while everyone else had a huge head start on him. Soon the pattern of the fight changed from Larry trying to get close and attacking, to Suzuki maintaining a distance and attacking from range. Larry finally suffered an attack which managed to wound him, though not by much. Still, it was unusual for Larry wasn't bleeding even if his skin had been torn open. Just as Lex was wondering why that was, Larry did the thing that had truly blown Lex's mind. He took out a commemorative coin that Lex had distributed during the Midnight Games, made of a rare metal that was not too valuable, but would preserve the token for a very long time. Then he threw the coin in his mouth and swallowed it. A few moments later, his wound started healing. Lex was flabbergasted, and finally realized what Aegis would have felt like back in the crystal realm when he swallowed that energy crystal. After a while, Lex had to divert his attention from the fight. It was clear that it would go on for a long time, and Lex had to keep an eye on the inn as well. Not that anything was going horribly wrong, but Lex would rather not wait before something went wrong to give his attention. Slowly, the hours rolled by. Lex noticed a few guests from the crystal realm as well, such as the sentinels or Poliads. He guessed they had come in from the random golden doors that opened up across the realm. He could see the signature wary behavior of new guests from them. Speaking of the crystal realm, Aegis had already informed him that Zagan had used the platinum key. If he managed to pass the test, the system designed for him, he would soon become a member of the inn. Still, Aegis himself had not decided whether or not he wanted to join the inn yet, and Lex couldn't be bothered by that. What he had been doing was bringing others to the Midnight Inn one by one. That had obviously included the Noel family. It should not have been such a big concern for Lex. After all, the Midnight Tavern had already attracted an unnecessary amount of attention, so even if the Noel family made the connection between the two, it did not matter. No, the real reason Lex was slightly perturbed by the presence of the Noel family was that their daughter, Greta Noel, and now the recently unaffiliated party had also come to the inn. Greta had joined the poker tournament and was a natural at it, although she insisted on playing strip poker. God only knew how she came up with the idea, for it shouldn't have been something that existed in the crystal realm. Moreover, while the inn itself was not enforcing the rules of strip poker, the inn also couldn't stop guests if they decided to take a few articles of clothing off. So, the previously extremely intense and very popular poker tournament had become even more popular, though there was a distinct lack of tension. How could anyone be tense when a group of old men in their boxers, accompanied by beasts who would shed a portion of their fur every time they lost? On the other side of the table, Greta, who was unnaturally skilled at the game, was over-encumbered by the stacks of clothing she had won since, for some reason, she insisted on wearing all her winnings. She also had people lining up to win her hand in marriage, pending approval from her father, but to prove themselves they had to complete a list of trials that she set. Lex remembered that he had been warned about Farty's sister back in the crystal realm, so he had a lot of guards stationed nearby in case she caused problems, but these were not problems he was equipped to handle. She was also selling the right to name one of her fingers through an informal auction. What did that even mean, and why was the highest bid already in the hundreds of thousands of MP? Well, none of it was against the rules, so Lex could only look away. But the problem with looking away was that he would end up looking at the 300,000 people long conga line being led by an inebriated Farty. Again, it was not against the rules. It was just that it created a logistical problem, which was that the unnecessarily long line was blocking numerous roads, buildings, and, most importantly, bathrooms. How did he even build a line this long? The festival hadn't even been going on for a day. A part of Lex felt he should consider himself lucky that this was the only problem he was having. In fact, he even calmed down. It really was a good thing. Then his heart dropped as he saw Brandon Morrison, his wife Audrey, as well as Marlowe and his wife getting ready to join. Lex sighed and closed his eyes. Well, it is a festival after all. He shouldn't blame people for partying. And it wasn't as if one can be expected to party within limits. Just as long as they don't start fighting anyone randomly. Lex decided to look away and focus on something else. He noticed that the number of devils at the inn was at an all-time high. Oddly enough, despite the bias that Lex had for them, they had never caused Lex any problems. That was contrary to what one would expect from a race that controlled demons and used entire planets as farms for resources that could only be nurtured through death and destruction. He hoped that wouldn't change now, and that they would continue to ignore the fact that Lex had personally aided in the loss of some of their planet farms. Chapter 4, 5720 Mil. Despite Lex's numerous concerns, the festival did not devolve into complete chaos with the inclusion of the various maniacal guests. Though Lex did quickly learn that cultivator's capacity for partying was much longer and harder than ordinary folk, something he should have expected. The fact that Lex now had a selection of various drinks due to the addition of the Midnight Tavern did not do anything to calm the situation down either. Though Lex was raking in MP, so what was the harm? Around the night of the second day, the mystery trial finally finished updating. The process was marked by an unusual phenomenon of golden light shining down from the heavens, right onto the door. Although that was not something Lex had planned, everyone assumed that it was a part of the festival. The mystery trial could now accommodate more than one guest at a time, which greatly increased the number of people who could have access to it. Previously, only on average 10 to 11 people could use it during the day, due to which, while it was almost always in use, its contribution to the MP income was minimal. The only other change it underwent was an enhancement on its already existing ability to train people's best skill. It was something Lex himself had never tried yet, and that made him wonder what his best skill was. He would think about trying it himself once the pressure from his impending breakthrough went down. Besides the mystery trial, another thing that attracted a lot of attention was the guest registry. Although Lex had claimed that he would ignore it till he felt better, he was taking everything much more seriously now. As such, while he did not create a separate area for it and left it at the Midnight Manor, he spread information about it among his guests via the workers and holograms. There was just one minor issue that he had not anticipated. Despite thousands of guests already signing it, his name was still on top. Lex had, of course, anticipated the exposure his name would get due to him already signing it, but it never occurred to him that his name might remain on top. After all, while he had quite a few accomplishments under his belt, he was merely 24 years old. With guests who lived well into the thousands of years, as well as cultivators from across the realms, he did not think his achievements would hold any measure. Unfortunately, no matter who else signed, his name remained firmly on top. It had begun attracting attention, and over the next few days, the identity and achievements of this so-called Lex Williams was called into question. Of course, no one dared to question the inn. But amongst themselves, they wondered. Even Marlowe, who had signed it, and was currently in the top 10, wondered if this was the same Lex as the one he knew. It seemed unlikely. After all, despite his many other achievements, the only reason Marlowe was in the top 10 was because of him achieving a status as a prime. He had embarked on a new cultivation journey, different from one anyone else he knew had ever faced. To give a better idea of how great an achievement this was, Brandon Morrison, Alexander's grandfather, and the person who brought the Morrison family to its current height, was not even in the top 10,000 signatories. He literally owned the planet of Mars, yet that achievement could not even get him close to the top. Lex could not help but think that establishing the Midnight Inn was being counted as his achievement and keeping him on top. If that was the case, he could not see anyone replacing his name anytime soon. This could have some problems. Besides that, on the 6th day, the battle between Larry and Suzuki finally ended. Larry's condition was far from ideal. He was missing his left arm, though he still wasn't bleeding. He didn't even go to the recovery pod, and instead began chomping down on a few metallic items. This wasn't the first time Lex had seen this peculiarity, to be honest. The first time was when Lex left Larry a golden key, and only a short while later, he suffered from an assassination attempt. Back then, under the guidance of the system, Lex had fed Larry the metal casings of his bullet from the heavy Harley, since that was the only precious metal he had at the time. The scope of this ability really bewildered Lex. The craziest thing was that Lex could confirm that Larry was still a human, despite his oddities. He sincerely wondered if he could get the same ability. Not that Lex was weak by any measure, but healing was a persistent issue with him. While for the moment he had the Lotus to help him in that regard, he did not want to rely on someone else forever. But that would all come later. As the days passed, Lex's attention was increasingly on the seventh and most important day, at least for himself. He had even made regular appearances as Leo during this time to make sure people see him, but as the end of the first week approached, he stopped doing everything else and focused only on this. He informed all the security to be extra cautious, and even summoned over 50,000 additional security personnel, only this time they were mortals. This was in case everyone else was forced into a state of breakthrough in their cultivation. The Griffin assured him that it would be fine, but Lex didn't want to take a chance. After all, during the last week, the number of guests at the inn had surpassed 20 million. That wasn't even the greatest issue. The most common guest at the inn was no longer human. Instead, they were devils. 13 million devils were inhabiting the inn at the moment, and it was extremely nerve-wracking to know for over 1 million of them, Lex did not have the authority to see their cultivation. Everything is going to be just fine, Lex told himself on the dawn of the seventh day. Occasionally missing content, please report errors in time. Chapter 458, No Big Deal. Ragnar stood with his hands behind his back, looking out at the beautiful horizon. The midnight impersonified, to him, everything that the human race strived for, and everything he fought to deliver to his brothers and sisters in race. It was peaceful, safe, exciting, and accessible. It was a glimpse of heaven that everyone deserved to experience. But the universe was not a heavenly place. To be at the inn right now, to experience the so-called raise and star level, which would aid everyone in cultivation, Ragnar had made difficult decisions. The galactic battlefield with the Fugen needed someone to oversee it always, and if he could not be there, someone else would have to take his place. But it was a price everyone was happy to pay, even the other generals. After all, Ragnar was the rising star of the empire. It was difficult to accept such a favor, but for his duty, Ragnar took it. After all, a cultivation retreat for him would not be just a few days. Months was the absolute minimum time he would need. He had planned on coming to the inn and stabilizing his mood to ready himself for the impending cultivation retreat. Yet this beautiful piece of heaven did not provide him with the peace he was expecting. Instead, a field of enemies revealed itself. Devils filled the grounds of the inn as far as the eye could see, all of them taunting him by keeping their humanoid shape. Devils, for reasons he did not understand, had two forms. One was their original, true form. The other was remarkably close to humans, with only minor additions or changes here and there, in the form of wings, horns, tails, etc. Ragnar had dedicated his life to fighting demons, yet he never forgot that demons were only the devil's slaves. His greatest wish upon seeing them was to unsheath his weapon and lay waste to them, even outnumbered as he was. Yet he knew that this was not the place. It was not fear of failure that stayed his hand, but the knowledge that if he made an enemy of the Innkeeper, the human race would lose a valuable ally. So, he stood silently on a hill, reigning in his volcanic rage, and watched silently as evil incarnate roamed the land freely. One by one, his soldiers also stood behind him, until an entire battalion appeared behind him. They said nothing. They did nothing. But just standing together was enough. It was a show of force. A show of pride. The devils did not pay much attention to Ragnar, for the most part. They had been extremely well behaved at the inn. In fact, many of them wished wholeheartedly to become even better friends with the Innkeeper. After all, the access the inn would give them to the people of the entire universe was far beyond anything they could achieve on their own. And for them, that access meant profits. There was one, however, who took great interest in teasing the general. Warhol grabbed a lawn chair and sat down directly beside the general, his thin black tail holding a glass of pina colada so that he could sip it. He didn't even say anything. Just his presence was enough to irritate this fearless human, and he knew it. How funny would he be if this hero of the Empire died during a tribulation because he was too irritated to focus? Not that the Empire was too important to the devils. They dealt with multiple realms, so how could a small empire only a few galaxies wide even be worthy of their interest? The Empire was only qualified to fight the demons, not them. Even that was not more than moderate amusement. Finally, around noon, something changed. A projection of the Innkeeper appeared in front of everyone, alongside a holographic prompt. It read, "Would you like to enter a personal cultivation abode before the star rank is raised?" Ragnar did not immediately respond, and instead turned to look at Warhol. "After this is over, catch me outside, how about that?" he said, looking the devil straight in the eyes. He had no fear of their racial superiority. Humans may lack their advantages, and have a lower starting point. But there was a ceiling restricting how strong they could grow. "Certainly," Warhol responded, but Ragnar had already disappeared by then. In the distance, amongst many other soldiers, Alexander watched the small exchange silently. Lex was not nervous, but the knowledge of how catastrophically bad this could go was at the forefront of his mind. It wasn't like he hadn't had a lot of guests before, but never had he entertained so many who were so powerful. Moreover, since he couldn't gauge their strengths, he didn't know if they were weaker, equal to, or stronger than the Griffin. Fortunately, once they started cultivating, they would not be able to cause any problems. After mentally preparing himself, Lex sat down in his meditation room and used the remote prescience ability to send a projection of himself as the Innkeeper out to everyone. Originally he planned on giving a speech and using the token in public, but suppressing his cultivation was becoming much too difficult. Even the slightest distraction would cause him to lose control and break through, so he decided to do it remotely instead. "Guests of the Midnight Inn, welcome," said his projection to all. All of the inn's activities and festivities had temporarily stopped, so everyone was looking just at him. "I'm sure most of you have heard, but for those who haven't, allow me to briefly describe to you what is about to happen. From time to time, I like to raise the level of the inn. This, in of itself is not a big deal, but many of my guests seem to enjoy the experience, and gain much from it. So, allow me to share this experience with you. And, if you enjoy it, remember to patronize the inn more often in the future." He did not elaborate too much, for he wanted to maintain the perception that this was no big deal to him. Yes, no big deal. After one final scan of the inn, Lex crushed his 0.5-star rank increase token. Chapter 459, The Change. The moment Lex crushed the token, a change took place at the Midnight Inn. A ripple seemed to travel through space itself, bending it as it passed through. The ripple in space caused proverbial knuckle cracks as it caused space to move and return to its original space, though none noticed such a detail, for the sound was at a frequency none at the inn could hear. Of course, the cracking sounds were not released randomly. Instead, it was the sound of micro-fissures in the space of the inn snapping shut after being healed by the ripple. They had been caused by the massive tear that the inn suffered from due to the attack of the butter knife and were left behind because the system had been unable to repair them directly. Yet now, through an indirect result of the rise in star level, the space at the inn had been repaired. But while this was one of many ethereal changes that the inn underwent that nobody noticed, there were a few changes everyone noticed. The most widely noticed change was a ripple of spirit energy that flowed through the inn, which happened to take place at the same time as the ripple through the inn. The stronger cultivators felt the nature of the energy change. It was like a window being opened in a stale room, finally allowing fresh air to flow in. It was the feeling of a cool spring breeze, except that instead of being felt physically on their skin like wind, the energy interacted with their own internal energy and refreshed their minds and bodies. The weaker cultivators, and even the mortals, however, felt something else entirely. The weaker cultivators felt a rush of energy fill their bodies, making them feel sick and bloated. It was too much too quickly, so much so that they completely lost control over their own energies. They did not even have time to feel alarm, for the energy immediately began displacing the energy within their own bodies. It did not disperse their cultivation, no. Instead, it changed the very energy that made up their cultivation, improving it, strengthening it. Across the board, every single one of them immediately felt their cultivation was much stronger and stabler, even if it had not improved yet. Of course, that was still to come. Alexander was amongst them. He had reached the chi training stage right now, as he was rebuilding his cultivation according to guidance by the Jotun Empire's secret techniques. He was supposed to have been phenomenally strong in his current state even as it was, yet he improved nonetheless. Mortals, though, went through the most drastic change. Whether it was the guards that Lex had hired, the entourage accompanying more successful people, or the kids in the spaceship who had yet to come of age to cultivate, all of them underwent extreme makeovers. The wave of spirit energy hit them hard, as if it were a physical sensation, and immediately flooded them with the feeling of nausea. Jimmy, the kid who discovered the first ever golden key dropped by Lex, and Layla, the daughter of the governor of Vegas Minima, who were the leaders of their gang of kids, had been playing together when the feeling hit them. They went pale all of a sudden, and the immense buildup of nausea completely overwhelmed their senses. They dropped to their knees as they lost strength in their limbs and immediately began throwing up. Partially digested food, blood, pus, and strange black materials came out in their vomit, but it also drained them completely from their energies. The kids collapsed, having been knocked unconscious, but the changes to their bodies did not stop just because they were not awake. Though they suddenly looked frail and starved, the fat on their bones having dissolved, leaving them in a skinny, bony appearance, an unusual strength began to fill them right after they were filled with weakness. They did not develop muscles as their flesh seemed to fill back into the way it originally was, and their skins retained their softness, yet the strength that was filling their bodies was very real. Many kids who suffered from various inborn diseases and allergies would awake to find them gone. Others who had minor physical and mental defects would discover that they could think clearly, and that their bodies performed better than they ever even dreamed. The mortals who were adults did not have changes that were as drastic, and they were not knocked unconscious, but they underwent some changes, nonetheless. Even the normal, common animals that inhabited the inn underwent a cleansing process. Back when the inn underwent its first advancement in star ratings, Lex too had been immortal, but he hadn't undergone any such experience, so he could never have imagined such a thing would happen now. The reason was, back then, the star rating was going from 1 to 1.5. Now it was going from 2 to 2.5. Although both were representing the same numerical change from their respective starting points, the actual change was far from being on the same scale. The one vine, growing on the cliffside near the pool of lava, also underwent changes, and began growing in the direction of the temple. While the change in spirit energy was the most obvious, and felt by the most people, it was by no means the most impactful. After all, it had to be remembered that while all the guests at the inn wrought numerous benefits due to the increase in star rating, it was the inn itself that was the primary beneficiary. In the same way that the space itself of the inn had been strengthened, so too had many other aspects of it. The light itself that shone all around the inn took on a deeper nature, as if something extra had been added to it. All the greenery took on deeper colors, the ground became firmer if that made sense, and the air became cleaner. While all the humans shed visible impurities and unnatural oddities from their bodies, so too did the inn shed, though its impurities were harder to detect. The immortals at the inn could not notice what exactly changed, but nonetheless, they felt that something grand and mysterious had happened. A strange light flashed through Loretta's eyes, the daughter of Balaam, though her thoughts remained a mystery. Something that the immortals did notice, however, and the thing that was responsible for spontaneously triggering everyone's increase in cultivation, was a ripple through the laws that manifested within the inn. Based on their cultivation, they were able to witness a deeper or shallower change in the laws, but they all felt the change to some extent. A point that had caused much curiosity for the past couple of weeks about the inn's claim of the increase in star rating was how it would actually aid them in cultivation. Even if there was a wave of pure spiritual energy, it could at most be perceived that it would have some effect on those with a lower cultivation. Yet from the nascent realm onwards, the nature of cultivation changed, and it was no longer about absorbing more or purer spiritual energy. So how then would the change in rating affect them? The answer was clear now. It was never about the increase in spiritual energy, though a shallow perception of the change may make it appear that way. From the get-go, everything was about the laws. There were other changes that all took place at the same time as well, but neither the mortals, nor the common cultivators nor the immortals noticed, for within a few seconds of the change happening, every living being at the inn had been occupied by the state of a breakthrough in one way or another. The griffin who, due to its strong cultivation, was confident that it would retain its state regardless of what happened, and continue its task, had one of the most severe reactions. Immediately it crushed an unknown token, before retreating to one of the cultivation abodes the inn offered. In its stead, another being appeared at the inn to perform its job. The being was covered in a black cloud, so its appearance and race were unknown. It silently took its place at the peak of the midnight mountain and surveyed the inn with its spiritual sense, and took in the odd hush that had fallen over the place. It was an unusual silence, matched only by the strange stillness that had inhabited the inn. After all, whether it was the guards, the guests, or the workers, all had retreated to a cultivation abode. The mortals who had experienced the change were still there, but they were currently too exhausted to do anything. The being in the cloud wondered what had happened. After all, by summoning it to replace it, the griffin had betrayed its contract, and would have to pay heavy reparations. Only Mary was left beside the mysterious figure to watch over the inn, though she was hidden from all. From a short blissful time, nothing happened at the inn. Then, the guests who had missed the timing for the change started appearing at the inn, though they were destined to be disappointed. Not only would they not experience the breakthrough, they would have to wait a bit before some workers got free to help them. Chapter 460 Differing from the norm. For a majority of the guests at the inn, their change of breakthrough did not last long. From a few minutes in the case of mortals, to a few hours at most, ranging from body tempering to chi training. Though the mortals had, overall, gained in strength, they were too exhausted and drained at the moment to do much of anything. Most of them retreated to their rooms to sleep, while a few who had not booked a room had to retreat from the inn. The kids on the spaceship had fallen asleep right where they fell. Considering the severe lack of personnel at the inn, it would have been extremely unsanitary if they remained where they were, for all of them had thrown up right there. Fortunately, the ship's cleaning function was exemplary, and far surpassed something mundane, like vacuuming robots. In a few minutes, the kids, though still asleep randomly all over the ship, were as clean and spotless as when they arrived at the ship, though it was a shame no one was around to see how it happened. Soon, the numerous rabbits aboard the ship recovered and began moving the children into the napping stations. The thousands of mortal guards Lex had hired, under the assumption that they would be the most helpful, for he did not imagine that mortals would also be affected, were thoroughly weakened and exhausted. But they quickly injected themselves with stimulants and forced themselves to perform their duties. Though they were all excited about the changes in their body, their job came first. The quickest to recover after them were the inn's workers, whether they were mortal or cultivators. From the moment of their creation they were inside the inn, and everything they ate and drank also came from the inn. They were safe from any pollution and impurities the outside world threatened, and so the changes they went through were less drastic. Most of them had also been cultivating as well anyway, though not everyone was as adept or successful as Gerard or Z. With this recent upgrade, most had firmly reached the peak of body tempering, or entered chi training. It could be imagined how in a few decades at most, all of these workers would become an extremely powerful force, but that was for the future. Speaking of Gerard and Z, both were undergoing breakthroughs as well, though in ways that were completely unexpected. Instead of raising his cultivation, Gerard's bloodline was experiencing another change. His previous advancement already made it so that he could face nascent cultivators back in the chi training realm. It was completely impossible to predict how his latest advancement would affect him. Z, on the other hand, was experiencing an epiphany. While he had a minor breakthrough in his cultivation, a majority of the change he experienced was in his mindset. He had been busy contemplating a new, secret ultimate attack when the change happened. As it happened, the change was just the spark of inspiration he needed, launching him into a profound state of discovery and creation, where he could make his ultimate attack according to his desires. Abruptly, the spirit and newest permanent resident of the inn, also experienced an evolution, one completely unlike he had ever known. It was a shame that he lost all the senses he had with his previous cultivation, or else he could have gained even more. Whether it was the baby Thulhu, Antia, Kawain, the galactic sovereign turtle, Ragnar, and all the rest, everyone was caught up in their own experience. Yet, oddly enough, even with realms much higher than the Earth Immortal realm, none went through the level of change that Lex was experiencing. The moment he crushed the token and the change happened, he finally stopped suppressing his breakthrough and let it happen. The result was an instantaneous eruption of spirit energy within his body, which was then, immediately after, replaced by an imperceptibly purer form of energy, before a vortex formed around Lex's body, rapidly absorbing all the surrounding energy. Lex became a bystander as the process happened, for the force of his breakthrough was so massive, should he try to influence it at all, it would only result in injuring him. For humans, cultivation up until the foundation realm had all been about preparing the body for the cultivation journey ahead. From body tempering, which strengthened the body from the inside to sustain the pressure and influence of external spirit energy, to chi tempering, which pushed the body's limits over and over again, one chi strand at a time, until the body was capable of holding streams of energy, until the foundation realm, which used all the energy to turn the body into a foundation that can support all future cultivation realms. These few realms, despite their seemingly weak power, could be said to be the most important cultivation realms a human would go through, because they would directly determine how high a cultivation realm that person could achieve. Even the slightest flaw in any of these realms would drastically affect the peak a human could reach. That was largely one of the reasons Alexander was cultivating once again, as well as the reason Lex's mother had his father cultivate from the beginning again as well. So, if these three realms could be described as setting the stage for the future, the next three realms of Golden Core, Nascent, and Earth Immortal, could be loosely described as rapidly transforming a cultivator's strength and turning them into a higher form of living being. Of course, this was only a loose description, as more than just that happened at each successive realm, for they involved far more than just that. Still, to the common man, the deeper intricacies did not matter, as even the more obvious and immediate changes were enough to consume all that they could conceive. After all, it had to be remembered, on a planet like Earth with incredible weapons of mass destruction, it was still Golden Core cultivators who were considered the peak of society, and it was the nascents who controlled the entire planet. The change that the Golden Core realm brought was that, once the body had a strong enough foundation to support it, it began to concentrate spirit energy not across the entire body, but in one specific core. Just because the area that the energy occupied was smaller did not in any way mean that the energy was less in quantity or concentration than the rest of the body. In fact, it was quite the opposite. The Golden Core, in spite of many misconceptions, was not actually formed of energy, and was instead a container that the body naturally formed during a process that would only occur once during the breakthrough process. Since it only ever happened once, damage to the core was one of the most difficult things to cure within the cultivation journey. This was because of how unique the Golden Core really was. Not only did it store a massive amount of spirit energy that was dozens of times more in quantity than the Foundation realm even as early as just the beginning of the Golden Core realm, but further influenced that spirit energy in a way that had only barely begun in the previous realms. The stored spirit energy took upon any affinities that the cultivator, or cultivation technique imbued, and turned that energy into a unique state owned only by the cultivator. By doing this, it also further evolved it from the most basic and lowest level spiritual energy, which could be commonly found across the universe. This was the first step the cultivator truly took towards higher forms of energy than just the common spirit energy. Of course, due to the nature of this energy being superior to ambient spiritual energy, it made cultivation much more difficult as well. After all, if previously a cultivator took in 2 units of energy from the atmosphere and was able to retain 1 unit of it within his body, allowing the rest to escape back into the atmosphere, Now the cultivator would have to absorb anywhere from 10 to 100 units of spiritual energy just to be able to convert it into 1 unit of energy that was kept within his body. The units mentioned here are any generic measurement, meant only as an example, to show the drastic scale of change that occurred. This was in an ordinary state of events. So then, how was Lex's situation different from the norm, so much so that it eclipsed the change experienced by every other cultivator in the entire realm? It was simple. Normally the golden core was formed naturally by the cultivator's body during the breakthrough, and the formation was fueled by the energy being absorbed by the body. But due to the fact that Lex's foundation, and thus his body, contained physical manifestations of laws, as well as the fact that there was a massive shift in laws taking place at the moment of breakthrough, not only was Lex's breakthrough absorbing spiritual energy to fuel the formation of his core, it was also absorbing laws. This was a change Lex was much too low-leveled to influence at all, or even notice for that matter. The rest of the as well as the origin realm, however, definitely noticed.